Hey everyone, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Upcycled Adulting, where I am always down to help you overcome obstacles, grow to accomplish your goals, and create healthy habits. And today we're going to talk about one of the healthiest habits of all, and that is enforcing boundaries. Now, this is part 3 in a 3-part series about boundaries. Number 1 was creating boundaries, number 2, communicating them, and number 3 is enforcing them. And this tends to be, I think, one of the scariest things about having boundaries, right, is how do you follow up on them? And a lot of times we really don't have to dig in quite as deep to this as we think we're going to, right? When we originally come up with our boundaries and we communicate our boundaries, then when it comes time, we're like, but I don't want to have to tell anybody in the moment, right? And so it just kind of is nerve wracking and we can be a little bit afraid of conflict. That's really not the problem we think it is. And so today I'm going to talk about why that's not the problem we think it is and how we're going to go about enforcing our boundaries. I'm so incredibly excited that you're here. Do not forget to subscribe so you don't miss a thing because I am always down to help you live the life you've been dreaming of, right? That's what we're trying to do here. So, when it comes to enforcing your boundaries, honestly, it is very much as simple as saying, hey, remember we talked about this, or hey, I'm really not cool with that, or I'm not down with that. You don't actually have to do a lot to enforce your boundaries. If it's a conversation that you're not comfortable with, you can just change the subject, right? It's always fine to just say, hey, remember, I had asked for this not to happen. That's also an option. You really should not be being met with conflict in this place because it shouldn't actually be a big deal. A lot of times when we have conflict in this area, it's because we go into it expecting conflict or we go into it reactively or aggressively, right? It's important to know that even when we've communicated our boundary to someone, that we are actually, in some cases, leaning into a little bit of change for them, right? So when we say things like, hey, I don't really want to engage in gossip. Okay. So I'm not really going to talk about that. And I would really prefer that you just not gossip with me, right? If the person has a habit of gossiping, truth is, they're probably going to start gossiping to you. And it's not because they're being disrespectful or inconsiderate, it's because that's their habit. And so simply saying to them, hey, remember, I don't want to talk about this, or just changing the subject will work. In the situation I highlighted in my last video about communicating boundaries, the reminder of, hey, remember, I'm allergic to that. Now, to remind you all, I was talking about how I found out in adulthood that I'm allergic to dairy. I'm EpiPen allergic. I'm allergic to casein, actually. And someone in my family kept insisting that I have dessert, right? And it was like this big thing with like, I can't have it if you don't have it. I really want dessert. Do you think I'm bad because I'm having it? Was just a whole thing. And I communicated to them that I really needed this to stop. They love eating out, but the nonstop like guilt and stress that was going on when we ate out because of this was really problematic for me. And I ended up actually reducing significantly, almost to nothing, how much I eat out with them, right? But what happened is I actually communicated it. So when it was happening, I tried to reinforce the boundary and I was like, listen, we've already talked about this, right? This is really not comfortable for me. This is a medical issue. Okay. So I tried to reinforce the boundary. I was like, this is not actually something that is cool, right? This experience is really a bummer for me. And it really takes away from us being able to do this, right? But what ended up happening is I ended up just deciding that I wasn't going to put myself in that situation anymore. That's the reality. There's only so much you can do. And so I just decided I'm not going to put myself in that situation anymore. It does not mean I don't have relationship with this person. I still do. I love them. I have very close relationship with them. I love seeing them. I do other things with them, but I avoid going to eat with them. That's all, right? Because I know that for whatever reason, whether this is a habit that they have or an inconsideration for this boundary, I know that this makes me really uncomfortable, that it's not likely to stop, and I don't want to keep engaging there, right? So, in reality, what I have done is created a change for myself to understand that your boundaries are about you, not about the other person. They're actually about you, right? So, in that moment, I'm saying, I am not actually comfortable with this and I don't want to do this anymore, right? This isn't good for me. This isn't working for me. Okay. I am just telling you that this doesn't work for me, right? I'm telling you, this doesn't work for me. And this is what would need to happen for this to work for me. But if it continues to not work for me, I'm just not going to do it. That makes logical sense. That is a reasonable thing. Okay. And so when we get into situations where we have to enforce our boundaries, this isn't about threatening the other person. This isn't about trying to manipulate or control the other person or creating rules for the other person. This is just like, I am not going to engage here, right? I am no longer engaging in gossip. So if you're gossiping to me and I try to change the subject and you turn it back to gossip and I say, hey, I really am not interested in gossiping about other people and you want to keep gossiping, I'm going to find a reason to leave this conversation. And I'm probably not going to get into a one on one conversation with you for the rest of the evening. Okay. That's how I'm going to handle it. That's how I'm going to enforce the boundary. I'm going to remove myself from that situation. A lot of times when it comes to enforcing boundaries, the reality is it's about removing yourself. It's about stepping away. And so, even in the example of the gossiping, simply like removing your part of the conversation from the conversation that is gossip is actually a change you're making. Okay. So you are not saying to the other person, how dare you? You're not allowed to talk to me about what you're actually doing is you're engaging in a different way. They're like, did you hear that so and so did blah, blah, blah? And you're like, oh, no, I didn't. But I'm so happy that I caught you here because, and you just roll right on past that because you have created a boundary that you also live in. I will not engage in conversations about gossip. Okay. You can try to talk to me about it, but I won't engage in it. Okay. I don't put myself in situations where I am forced to, right, do things or behave in ways that are inauthentic to me. That's the reality. And as an adult, I am a 50-year-old grown woman. I do not have to engage. I do not have to show up. I do not have to. And a lot of times I think we forget this. We have a lot of obligatory relationships and a lot of obligatory events in our lives. There are a lot of things you don't have to show up for. Now, when we're talking about your work life, somebody in your work life who is not adhering to or not respecting your boundaries, well, in extreme circumstances, you might need to get another job. That's just the reality of that. But you can disengage from that. You can say, yeah, I'm not cool with that. And if the person is in a position of authority where you can't do that and you can't go to their supervisor because this is a toxic work environment, then your boundary is, I cannot work in this environment anymore. Okay. And that's just real. And I'm not saying that that is an option for everyone. I know that that is a privilege to be able to go find a new job, to be able to walk away. I understand that. But it may be high time that you start taking classes or diversifying your skills, that you start looking in other places for a replacement for your work. And that doesn't mean that you are caving on your boundaries in the meantime. That means that you're honoring your boundaries by creating a pathway to the enforcement of the boundary, right? Because in that case, your boundary is, I'm not going to keep working here if this is going to continue to be a toxic work environment. And that means I'm going to equip myself to leave. Okay. Sometimes in the moment, we cannot enforce our boundaries. I see this all the time on social media, especially right now, especially in the 21st century. I see people talking about the fact that they're living in multi generational family environments, right? Where you're trying to raise your children, but you live with your parents and you have boundaries about what you want your parents to and not to do. And that is completely and totally reasonable, but you're living in their house. Okay. And that creates a complication because you're dependent upon them, just like you're dependent upon the boss. And so the thing that you have to do there is actually start creating the pathway where you can enforce your boundary and you can say, yeah, if this doesn't change, I'm going to leave. If this doesn't change, I'm going to leave because I'm not going to sit here and keep doing this. Okay. I have the right to have boundaries. And that is absolutely 100% true. And remember, the other person has the right to have boundaries too. And what does that mean? That means you're not always going to be compatible. You're not always going to be each other's cup of tea. Okay. There are people in my own family who have boundaries that I just can't abide, right? I just can't abide that boundary. I can't do it because it directly conflicts with what I need in a relationship, right? And that's okay. That just means that we're not quite as close, right? That we maybe don't spend as much time together. That maybe at family events, we're not the ones chatting and catching up quite as much because, or we avoid those topics because we know that we're kind of diametrically opposed there. Okay. Just because you have a boundary doesn't mean the other person has to honor it. Just because you have a boundary doesn't mean the other person doesn't have a boundary that conflicts. Everybody needs different things in their relationships, right? Everyone needs different things in their relationships. I actually am currently dealing with a boundary conflict going on in my own family that has been like a whole navigational issue, right? So I have a family member who has a young child, okay? And like under 5. All right. I have very, very clear boundaries that children are allowed to have body autonomy. And so, what does that mean to me? That means that if a child says, I don't want to hug you, they do not need to hug me. I do not want any argument about it. I'm very uncomfortable with it. I don't want any pressure on it, right? I just want it to be like a, hey, whatever the kid wants is cool, right? I'm totally cool with it because it's their body and they have the right to choose that. Anyway, so the parent is of the child in my family that this is going on with. The parent is like, no, no, you have to hug her. Right. So whenever we're at family events and we go to leave or they go to leave, the parent says, you must hug them. They're your family. You have to hug them before they leave. Okay. Now listen, they want to make that rule with their child, okay? And their boundary is that you do not contradict them and you do not contradict what they're telling their child to do. That's a reasonable rule. That's a not rule, that's a reasonable boundary, right? That is their boundary. I made the rule for my child. You don't contradict me. Most of us have that boundary, right? We don't want our parenting being um we don't want our parenting being called into question or being conflicting things or undermined. We don't want our parenting being undermined to our kids, right? So that's reasonable, correct? But it's also reasonable that I have a boundary that I will not force a child to hug me. Okay? I won't engage in it. Okay? I won't engage in it. So we have a conflict now, right? I respect your boundary as a parent to make whatever rules for your child you feel most comfortable with. I do. However, I don't feel right being a part of making your kid hug me, right? So typically, what I do in that situation is I remind the parent, I say, just so you know, I'm okay with this, right? Just so you know, it's okay with me. Like my feelings won't be hurt. Usually this kind of boundary is actually about like not hurting the adult feelings, right? Not wanting my feelings to be hurt, that their child doesn't want to hug me. My feelings are not hurt by that. I'm like, "Oh, it's totally cool." Or, oh, sometimes I'll give, like, the parent, like, the excusing thing, right? They're so tired right now. They just wanna go home. I understand, right? So I say it to the parent, not to the child. I don't say, "You don't have to hug me." Instead, I say to the parent, "This is my perception." Or the other thing is, I leave the room. I'm suddenly very busy, okay? So with people I know do this, a lot of times I just make myself very busy when they're leaving so that I'm not available to hug the child, right? Like I know this kid does not like hugging, okay? I know, or I just know this kid doesn't like hugging me. That's okay, right? They don't want to hug me. Totally cool. I know that. So I'm suddenly washing the dishes, or I'm suddenly, right? Something where I can't hug them back. Okay. So then I'm just like, oh, I'll catch you next time. So sorry. Hands in the sink, right? And you guys have got to go. I totally get it. And I do that. So being able to also navigate around they have a boundary and you have a boundary so that both boundaries are respected can be more complicated, but it is worthwhile, right? And obviously, I have talked to this person many times and said, hey, this is hard for me because I feel this way. But what's happening here is, in theory, they do too. So they always agree with me when we talk about it when it's not happening, right? But in the moment, it's almost like an automatic reaction to say, oh, don't forget to hug so and so too. Well, you have to hug, right? You have to hug so and so too. I have actually found that a lot of children, I love kids, but I've actually found that a lot of children don't actually hug me. And part of the reason is I allow that, right? It feels good to be a kid who gets their boundary acknowledged because a lot of times kids don't, right? So, like, a lot of kids will exercise that they can do that. And by the way, just so you know, that makes my relationship with those kids so much closer and stronger, right? It creates a mutual respect and a really deep bond, okay? That they're allowed to create boundaries with me, even though I'm a grown up and I'm an authority, right? Because these are kids in the family, which means for most of them, I'm a sort of authority figure to them. And so they feel seen and heard and respected, and it creates a foundation that's really, really powerful and strong. Okay. Which, by the way, is part of why I'm very close with most of the young people in my family, is because of this. All right. And if any of them is watching you, they'll get in the watching this, they'll get in the comments and they'll tell you that this is absolute truth. But when it comes to your boundaries kind of colliding with each other, just creating the space where you can really have a conversation about that and changing your own behavior, okay, to make that window not necessarily open so much. Like, for example, when I say I just am busy doing something so that my boundary doesn't have an opportunity to be bumped up against by this you must hug rule, right? I just get myself out of that situation. Your boundaries are about you. The only person you can control is you. So when it comes to enforcing your boundaries, the thought that we need to have is, what can I do to make sure my boundary is honored, or to show my self respect, to remain authentic to what matters to me in that moment? Okay. This is not a threat. This is, what can I do? Okay. How can I be proactive, and how can I respond in a way that is true to me, authentic to me, and honoring to what I need in this moment, rather than being reactive, making threats, setting rules, and creating conflict, right? I'm going to be proactive and I'm going to respond instead of blowing up. So, really thinking about, these are my boundaries and this is what I'm going to do. This is what's going to happen. This is what I would like to see happen. Okay. This is how I can respond in a moment that my boundary is being bumped up against, is really, really important. And also just being mindful of the fact that you can only respond so much. And then there's a place where you might have to say, this is not a really healthy relationship and I really need to back away. Not necessarily I need to go no contact. I'm going to do content around that too, but I need to back away. Okay? Because as I follow the Maya Angelou rule always, which is when someone shows you who they are, believe them. Okay. So if somebody shows you that they don't value you and they don't respect your boundaries and they just don't respect boundaries in general, or that they're going to keep pushing, or that they are, you now know that. Okay. They're not going to change. They're not going to become something entirely different. Okay. They're not going to show up in your life in a healthy way and contribute to your well-being. So guess what? It's time for you to back away. Okay. Because one of the things that really is important here is that your relationships have some sort of balance. It doesn't mean it's always going to be 50-50. That is a crock. That's not how relationships work. But it also shouldn't always be 90-10. Okay. You shouldn't be caving all the time and letting people walk all over you and right. And they always get their way and you consistently do everything for them, but they don't reciprocate. All right. That's not healthy. So save your energy for a relationship where you're actually getting more reciprocation and more respect and more consideration for you and your boundaries and your needs, right? So your boundary might be, I see you once a year at Christmas parties. That's it. Okay. How am I enforcing my boundary? I see you once a year at a Christmas party and I say almost nothing to you. I do not engage in in-depth conversation with you, because you have shown me that you can't respect my boundary. Okay. And please know that it is okay to do this with anyone. I did just say that. Anyone. All right. Just because somebody is your parent or your sibling or does not mean that you can't actually do this. That you can't pull back, because you can. And it doesn't have to be fair. If you have one sibling who consistently does not respect your boundaries or is in some other way unhealthy or unsafe for you, and you have one sibling who shows up great and who's respectful of your boundaries, or you have more compatible boundaries with them, it's okay that you're closer to one and you're more distant from the other. Okay? That's totally cool. I say that because the person who's most likely to tell you that that's not cool is the person who doesn't respect your boundaries and is not very healthy or safe for you. Okay? They are lying. They are misleading you. They're trying to get something from the relationship for free, meaning without themselves reciprocating in any way, without themselves doing the work. And by the way, they may not just be lying to you. They may also be lying to themselves. Most people in that situation just are not very self-aware. It's not necessarily about you. It's about them. They're not very self-aware, okay? And so they're not equipped to show up differently. Believe them when they show you that. Believe them, okay? And do not forget to subscribe to this channel where you are going to learn how to overcome obstacles, create healthy habits, and grow so you can accomplish your goals. That includes all the parts of your life, whether it's basic household adulting or small steps with our Small Step Saturdays or relationships or work or whatever you're working on, okay? I'm gonna help you get there and get it done, because you are absolutely amazing and you deserve to live the life that you've been dreaming of, and you can. I know it might be hard to believe right now. I believe in you. You can do it. I promise you can. And it is so worth it. All right. I'll see y'all next time. Bye, everyone.